This is Michael Swain, Executive Director of Freedom of Religion South Africa, with my colleague, our in-house legal advisor, Daniela Ellerbeck. And we have the great privilege and pleasure this morning of speaking with Advocate Pearl Kupe. Pearl is very well known to many. She has been a tremendous source of strength and encouragement, an activist in the body of Christ, particularly for many years. And this morning, we're going to be talking about a subject which is not unshrouded with controversy, which is comprehensive sexuality education. And Pearl has been very much at the forefront of this issue. And we want to obviously decide and hear what Pearl has to say about this morning. So Pearl, great to have you on the show. And thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you to Daniela as well. And I also do want to premise this, this discussion by also thanking 4SA, who has really been at the forefront of this fight in terms of making sure that every religious freedom that is aligned with CSE, the subject matter of CSE, is actually addressed, and that the parents do have some sort of say. So thank you to 4SA. It's been a long fight, and it's a continuing fight, but I think it's a really worthwhile fight. It's something that we have to all enter into, and parents as well have to make sure that they're educated on these issues.
So Pearl, maybe we can start off by just asking you, why is comprehensive sexuality education such an important freedom of religion and belief issue?
It's very important because, let's go back, first of all, to Section 15 of our own Constitution. We know that the Constitution obviously is the most supreme law of the land. It sets out rights, it sets out obligations as well. And that's where all other pieces of law and legislation take their strength from. So the fact that religious freedom is contained in the Constitution already is telling you something about the importance of religious freedom. And religious freedom and parental rights go hand in hand, because parents essentially are there to raise up their children, to teach, to train, to equip their children, to make sure that they can deal with the issues of life, to have that ability to transfer their values to their children. And values essentially are formulated by our faith and by what we believe in. So that's why the religious freedom right is so important. Once it's taken away, it now denies parents that right to transfer their values to their children.
Well, I think obviously it's part of the CAPS curriculum, which the government is allowed to set. It's allowed to decide what is taught in school, not how it is taught. And obviously sexual understanding and what have you, comprehensive sexuality education is part of the life skills and life orientation. But isn't government basically arguing that parents aren't doing a really great job here, and we need to inform them better about sex and sexuality? What would be your comment to that?
My comment is that, I think perhaps in some ways the government may be right. So, we're not going to play ostrich and pretend that there are not pockets and areas where parents may have abdicated on that responsibility to teach, train. And we know for various reasons, I speak also as an African. I know that sometimes in our own culture, it's a little bit difficult to have that conversation with our children. But Michael, I don't think the answer is to take away an intrinsic right that really intrinsically belongs to parents. It's not justification for that. What we should be doing is empowering the parents to actually do that. Not to take away their right completely. The state cannot replace themselves and start to parent the children with values that they believe in. I don't think there's any sort of justification for that. So parents need to be empowered. They need to be, and that's one of the things we try to do with other organizations, is we've tried to bring in alternative curriculum, alternative material that will help parents, teach their children, tell them what needs to be done, but without imposing values that are foreign to their particular family unit. I think another reason, Michael, which I would like to just add in, why it's important for parents to be involved in this, is that every child is different. Every child is different. Some, children are unique. Some children are ready for such conversations earlier on than others. And so it's parents who know their children. It's parents who understand the readiness that this child, may be a little bit, the way their brain works, the way their personality is, the way their character is, they may be able to grasp these principles at an earlier age, but this other child may not. And so to assume that all children are ready at the same time, I think is a drastic mistake. It's not taking into consideration the individuality and the uniqueness of each child. And only parents are best equipped to know their child, to know how to approach the subject matter, to know how to pass on their values, to know how to teach them about sex and their sexuality in a way that the child is not destroyed. And that has been something which over the years, traditionally, historically been left to the parents to do, the parents to provide that education. And I think it should remain that way.
Yeah, Paul, as you're talking, I'm just thinking about the fact how religious freedom in Section 15 of the Constitution is freedom of thought, belief, opinion, conscience, and religion. So, colloquially we talk about religious freedom, but it actually goes much further than that, protecting the thoughts people might have, their varying opinion on things, their varying conscience, persuasions on certain things. And I'm thinking about how, even in terms of international law, religious freedom and parental rights are so closely intertwined. They're basically inseparable from one another. And, in terms of binding international law that South Africa has signed and is party to, parents are the ones that are primarily responsible for their children's well-being. And parents are the ones that have the right to guide and direct their child's education and upbringing in line with their religious beliefs, and including the child's religious and cultural education. And I'm just even thinking about, in terms of domestic law, the Children's Act, parents are the ones that have the primary duty of care. A school might be in loco parentis, but parents are the ones that have a primary duty of care. And even in terms of the Children's Act, care includes protecting your child from exploitation and physical and emotional or moral harm. So again, we see that parents' thoughts on, because as Michael always says, and I'm sure he'll reiterate that now, is it's impossible to teach about sex from a value neutral perspective unless you're purely going to talk about the biology, which is not what the department's scripted lesson plans that they drafted do. So it's you're going to be touching on values, you're going to be touching on thoughts, beliefs, opinions, matter of conscience, all of that, things that are, as you've said, traditionally the role of the parents. So I thought I would point that out, how closely related religious freedom is with parental rights, and how the state can't override that.
So Paul, what in your view and in your experience, because you've obviously done a lot of speaking about this, you've met with a lot of people, what are the main concerns that are being raised about the CSE that is being taught, or that the government would like to see taught in our public schools?
Yeah, I'll just give me a minute, Michael, because I'd also like to just touch on a couple of points that Daniela also excellently raised. And the aspect of the duty of care being, something that is known internationally and also flows down at a national level. And yet it's not being reflected in the policies. And so it's almost like there's a contradiction. There's a high level understanding that the primary duty of care is for the parents, but then the policies, why are the United Nations, the UN and international organizations not actually embracing that internationally recognized principle? And so I think you pointed out some very, very important things, Daniela, and I think we need to be consistent in our understanding, in our application, and in our rollout of principles and protocols. There are quite a number of concerns that have been raised around the issue of comprehensive sexuality education. I think that the biggest one is one we've already discussed in terms of how it takes away parental rights. Another one in terms of the liberality that the scripted life lessons and life plans actually represent. Very liberal views which are not embraced by everybody, and especially within our own context here as people who in Africa are very pro-family and family oriented. Many of the lessons that are contained in that are what we feel are anti-family. So it's really very liberal in terms of the principles it advances. It's I do not think it actually does what it's supposed to do, Michael, because here's the irony of it, is the rationale that they've set out and put out for bringing in CSE is that it's supposed to reduce HIV, AIDS, it's supposed to reduce STDs, it's supposed to reduce teenage pregnancy, sexual assaults, and all that. So how does teaching children how to have sex, especially at an early age, because that is essentially what CSE does. It teaches them how to have sex. It teaches them how to put on condoms. It teaches them how to actively engage in sex. And so for me, it completely boggles the mind. It's a perplexing, very perplexing that now we're going to reduce HIV, AIDS, STDs, and teenage pregnancy by teaching children to have sex. It just does not make sense at all, completely. And so that's completely worrying to me. And it's worrying for us in South Africa in particular.
Have there not been any studies on this? I mean, surely they didn't just suck this out of their thumb and just roll it out. I mean, they seem to be able to prove that what they're doing is beneficial, not so.
Well, they've done studies, and that, in fact, Michael, they've not only not been able to prove that it's beneficial, take it a step further. I think I did a carte blanche interview last year sometime or early this year, where we actually showed statistics that, in fact, it's not accomplishing the purpose that it was set out to accomplish. If anything, the statistics have gone higher up. They've gone higher up. The teenage pregnancies and HIV, STDs have gone up. And I think for us in South Africa, let's try and localize this issue. And let's look at our own environment. It's important not to just bring in values that are brought in randomly from other places. Let's look at the reality of our situation. Let's look at our environment and what we're facing. What are our issues? South Africa as a nation is in the top 5 nations whereby GBV, sexual assault, and rape are actually the highest, top 5 nations in the world. And so to create an environment where it becomes easy for people to actually be taken advantage of, sexually molested, I think it's very irresponsible. To create an environment where people can interchange the toilets. You know, you can go to any bathroom that you please. That is endangering, you know, the protection of young girls. Young girls are already being accosted in toilets, in public toilets. They're being raped, they're being molested. And now you are bringing in an environment that says anybody who feels that they are this type of way can enter. So that means people can pretend and can violate young girls under pretense. I mean, it's opening us up to more risky behavior. And I think it really is incumbent on us as South Africans to put in programs and policies that we know are going to reduce the opportunity for sexual assault, for teenage pregnancies. We have situations, Michael, right now, where the high level of teenage pregnancy in schools, it has been found that some of the perpetrators are teachers themselves, are male teachers. I've done a study on this, and some of the key perpetrators are male teachers. So what are you doing now by effectively allowing such, you know, open liberal sex to be taught in? You are actually empowering some predators within the education system. And of course, when I say this, I'm not accusing every teacher. out there. There are some very good teachers, very committed teachers, very faithful teachers. But I am also pointing out that there are some teachers who are sexually taking advantage of young girls out there. Let's make sure we do not create an environment whereby such type of criminal behavior will be, given more leeway, that people can actually hide under this, that they're teaching young girls or teaching them on CSE, and yet they're actually taking advantage of young girls for their own personal benefit.
Yeah, Paul, I just want to touch on two things that you said there. So I think the first is important to point out that, the CSE scripted lesson plans, for example, that the department got funding from USAID for.
Yes.
It's not just the biology of sex. We've mentioned that they're not value neutral. And actually, it emphasizes sexual autonomy and the pursuit of sexual pleasure. So if you put that in context of this is what kids are going to be seeing in their workbooks and what teachers are going to be teaching, then of course it leads to all the consequences that you've already stated. So then it's no surprise that the results are what they are. And then you just said, you mentioned something very important about importing values. And I just wanted to say that, there's so much talk about decolonization and so forth, and the need of African solutions for African problems.
Absolutely.
And even in terms of, again, finding international law, because South Africa ratified the African Charter on Human and People's Rights back in 1996. And even in terms of that charter, the South African state is obliged to protect and promote morals and traditional values that are recognized by the community, and also to protect and support the family, which is seen as the natural unit and the very basis, the foundation of society. So that is what the South African state is meant to do. It's obliged to protect traditional values. But what we're seeing is this importation, this colonization with foreign money of our education system, with values that are foreign to South Africa and Africa as a whole. I mean, I would say probably South Africa is more liberal than many other African countries, but even South Africans are not liberal enough to think that it's okay to have the graphic content being taught to 10-year-olds that I know Michael took pictures of back in the day when the scripted lesson plans were first tabled to Parliament. I mean, everyone was shocked and their jaws were on the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, maybe let me just respond to that quickly, Daniela. Very, very important what you've mentioned. I mean, what makes us who we are as Africans is our value system, is the Ubuntu, what we call Ubuntu, which really is talking about taking care of one another, respecting one another, dignity, and all of those things. And once that is taken away, the core moral thread of what makes us who we are, our identity as Africans, is completely taken away. And I've said this many times, I've presented it at Parliament to say, let us not embrace values that are foreign to us just because we were colonized. And then the colonizers come with money. And so because we want money, and let's be specific about that amount of money, because we're not talking about 10 Rand here. We're talking about 25 million US dollars, I think was the figure that was given. And that's looking at close to 500, almost $500 million Rand. So I don't even think that the Department of Basic Education is embracing this because they believe in it. I believe they're embracing it because they've obligated themselves by taking money that was given to them. And we don't even know where that money has gone, to be honest with you. We don't even know how that money has been allocated. But somewhere along the line, we know that the Department of Basic Education has benefited financially. We cannot allow the lives of our children to be negatively impacted where they are open to all sorts of things. It is possible to teach them about sex without having them know how to put on condoms. It is possible to teach them about sex without having them know about some practices, sexual practices, which can endanger their life and their health. It is possible to do all of that. And I'm reminded of Uganda, which is one of the countries that did so well in fighting HIV/AIDS, and yet they had the highest HIV/AIDS statistics. And Uganda did not embrace the whole be faithful and condomize, principles, the ABC, as it was then. They focused mostly on abstention. And the message that they sent to the nation was, if you are not married, abstain. And that was really the drive that helped them win the war against HIV/AIDS, coming from the highest and country with the worst HIV/AIDS statistics in the world to almost completely eradicating HIV/AIDS. So as you've mentioned, African solutions. Let's look to African nations that are winning, that we know they have case studies, practical examples to show that we can win this war against HIV/AIDS, against STDs, against teenage pregnancies, without teaching our children to be more promiscuous and to be more immoral.
Paul, I think you raised such excellent points there. And obviously, if one looks at the scripted lesson plans, it's not just, okay, let's learn how to put on a condom. It's much more explicit than that. And the foreign values that are being imported that are so contrary to Ubuntu. Ubuntu says, I am because we are. And it recognizes that my actions affect you. It affects the community. If I make choices that are contrary to, for example, the high standard of sexual ethics that you described from Uganda right now, then that affects and erodes the fabric of society. It's going to affect you, my actions and my choices. And that at the heart of Ubuntu is that my choices affect you. I am because we are community first, right? And what we see from the values that are being imported in CSE with and I mean, the scripted lesson plans are based on UNESCO's International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education, which Planned Parenthood helped draft. So then it's obviously not a surprise to learn that sexual autonomy, so individualism at a very high degree with no consideration for the understanding that my sexual choices and ethics affect the rest of the community, and the pursuit of sexual pleasure without consequence is what is contained in these scripted lesson plans. So yeah, like you said, it's fascinating that we are, because it comes with the money, because we're importing these values, this individual autonomy at any cost, even though we're a community-based society.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's taking away the DNA of who we are. This, looking at it, and as you've said, FORSA and other organizations have actually looked at the scripted lesson plans, and definitely explicit images, very graphic nature of the content out there. There are pictures, visual pictures. It is not age appropriate. And as we've said already, it's pushing an ideological agenda, which really, undermines all of our values and beliefs. And what's worse, I remember you and Michael, was it February 2020, I think, or was it 2019 or 2020?
Was it that meeting where we were all at the department
at the Protea Fire and Ice? Yes, the Protea Fire and Ice, because the Department of Education had claimed to consult. And everybody came down so hard on them that they eventually had to admit that they never consulted. And even then, you were there, Daniela, I was there, Michael. It was not a consultation. They were there just to tell us what they were going to do, what they were going to roll out. In spite of the very valid points we all raised, they still were pushing ahead. And I think it's an insensitive government, and it's dictatorial type of leadership, where government and leaders would not want to take in the viewpoints of the citizens. It's citizens that they vowed to represent, and they do not even want to listen to them or consult. That is not, it's no longer a democracy. It's now a dictatorial kind of environment. So I think that is very concerning about the way in which comprehensive sexuality education was rolled out, put in unilaterally without even hearing the views of the majority of the people and the stakeholders involved.
and tested and implemented in pilot projects without parental knowledge or consent. And I mean, if you read, for example, the midline report, and viewers can look on the 4SA website for our CSE articles and find the hyperlink there. But I mean, the tone, Pearl, that comes out is paternalistic from the state side of my citizens are too dumb, for lack of a better word, to be able to do this by themselves. They're wrong, we're right, we're going to do it this way, and they must just get in line and listen. So exactly what you were saying now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
Bill, we have a combination of a type of a cultural imperialism coming in internationally, combined with a very paternalistic view of the state, which basically says we know better than parents. But what can parents? I mean, if, you know, as I'm no longer have children at school, but I mean, if I was a parent and listening to this, I would be going like, wow, this is something that I'm suddenly very keenly aware of. Maybe I didn't know it before, but what can I do as a parent at this point, knowing that this is going to be basically pushed upon my children? What can I do to, in a sense, make my voice heard? What can I do to push back against this?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we must be aware that the school governing bodies are very important bodies. These are bodies which sometimes, even when you have a policy, the aspect of the policy actually being rolled out is really left with the school governing bodies. So I want to say that to the church, because in a previous meeting I had on a Zoom meeting, one of the education officials challenged the church and said this. It was a meeting to discuss really allowing alcohol to be sold in schools. And when I objected, the official said this to me and challenged the church and said, even if this law is changed and alcohol is allowed, ultimately, it is the school governing body that decides. So if you have a switched on, what is the word they use now? Woke. If you have a woke or switched on school governing body who are there to protect the interests of their children, even if the policy is passed, the school governing body still has the ability to review, to choose the content, what is allowed, what will not be allowed. So I want to encourage parents, first of all, to make sure they get on those school governing bodies and they review the content. I think we were on a Zoom meeting recently, Michael, when one of the ladies said she's on the SGB body and they were deceived and they were not shown the material. So you must insist on seeing it. And don't allow that deception to happen. We need to be vigilant about it, especially in this time, because South Africa, along with other nations, have now signed this Education Plus initiative, which has been launched by 5 different UN agencies. And that is really tying us down more. And we know that the agreement was ratified at the UN Transforming Education Summit in New York in September. And what this does is to give full authority to the UN to overhaul sex education and to bring in their own radical sexual education. So as parents, we want to make this a call to action along, together with you, 4SA, all of us. We are challenging parents and we are challenging teachers. We are challenging schools, first of all, to consider alternatives to DBE's SLP plan. There are other alternatives, ways that this sex can be taught to children. There's other learning material out there. No apologies, family sexuality education. There are available alternatives out there. And we want to say to schools, there's a duty imposed on you to act in the best interest of the children. And please let parents know that they must be involved in the decision-making. To teachers, we say the same thing. Consider alternative programs that are out there. Have conversations with the SGBs, the school governing bodies. And to parents, we say the same thing. Engage with the school governing body. Consider alternative sex ed programs. I also want to say, take responsibility yourselves as parents. Take responsibility for teaching your child. In the event that, somehow they will be exposed to CSE, make sure that you've already given them a foundation and taught them the way that you want them to be taught, given them a sense of their values, teach them the consequences and dangers of having illicit and open sex that is not inclusive of moral and ethical values. Teach them that. Take up that personal responsibility of teaching your child about sex and sexuality. So that's what we want to say in a nutshell, and encourage everybody in that area. And as children, as school children, as learners, please, if there's anything that you're being taught out there that makes you uncomfortable, that's bringing trauma on you, that, you know, is really upsetting you, please do not be afraid to speak out. Speak out. Let the school know, let your parents know that there's an issue that you're not comfortable with and you do not want to be part of that discussion. Please speak out. You have a right to speak out. It's your constitutional right. And so use that constitutional right. Do not be intimidated by any person, either from the school or otherwise. Do speak out. It is your constitutional right, which cannot be taken away.
Wow. Well, thank you, Pearl. This has been a really enlightening discussion. Thank you for the insights that you've given. Thank you for really taking a stand for this matter and for really speaking out as a parent and as a mother. It's very refreshing to hear this viewpoint, and we deeply appreciate you giving us your time this morning. So many, many thanks from us.
Thank you so much, Michael. Our children are not only our future, they're actually also our present. And this is a generation that we have to make sure that we protect their minds, we protect their thoughts, their beliefs. Like Daniela pointed out, the right, Section 15 right, is not just freedom of religion, it's belief, opinion, thought, and we have to protect all of those as parents, as teachers, as school governing bodies, as lawyers and attorneys, as 4SA organizations, as leaders of this nation. All of us should be collectively involved in protecting our children's rights, our children's right to freedom of religion, belief, thought, and opinion. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a real privilege.
Thank you.
Good day. This is Daniela Ellerbeck, the Legal Advisor to Freedom of Religion South Africa. Remember to like and share this video, and then click on the subscribe button to make sure you never miss our video updates on vital religious freedom issues.